Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on this lovely June evening. My name is Rose Heitoff, and I am the events coordinator and bookseller at Print a Bookstore, which we brought our people, which is Portland's newest independent bookstore located at the intersection of India and Congress. So if you haven't been, please do stop by. We're delighted to be here tonight to co-host Linda Holmes and Nora Flaherty with the Portland Public Library Spotlight Series. Thank you to Rachel Harkness, the program manager for the Spotlight Series, to the Portland Public Library, of course, and to the Press Hotel. Before I introduce Linda and Nora properly, a few quick asides. Now would be a great time to turn off or silence your cell phones or double check that you've already done so. We have plenty of copies of Evvie Drake Starts Over for sale over here to my right with Josh, and we accept cards, cash, and check. Linda will be sticking around to sign books after the discussion. And while I have your attention, a few upcoming events for July. So on Friday, July 5th, which is also First Friday, Print and Mechanics Hall will be kicking off our inaugural reading series at the Mechanics Hall Library at 7 p.m. with authors Michael Carita and Julia Spencer Fleming. The authors will be discussing Michael's newest thriller, If She Wakes. And then the following day, on Saturday, June 6th, we'll have Maurice Carlos Ruffin in store discussing his debut novel, We Cast a Shadow.
The book is so good. The book is so good.
So agreeing with Linda is writer and critic Roxanne Gay, who calls this novel incisive and necessary, and it's perfect for fans of Get Out and Paul Beatty's The Sellout. Do you agree?
Yeah, the book is amazing. I think that was the book that I apologize for this. I wrote on Twitter, this book kicked my ass. Like, the book is so good. It is so good. Yeah.
Great. So see you guys on Saturday, July 16th.
Yeah.
So there's more great events in July, including Ocean Vuong and the launch of Richard Russo's newest novel. And all this and more can be found on our website, printbookstore.com, and in our email newsletter. There's also tons of great upcoming events at the library, and there's some literature on the back table about all of those. Now back to the reason we're all here tonight. Linda Holmes is a pop culture correspondent for National Public Radio and the host of the podcast Pop Culture Happy Hour, which has held sold-out live shows in New York, Los Angeles, Washington, and elsewhere. She appears regularly on NPR's radio shows, including Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. Before NPR, she wrote for the New York Magazine Online and for TV Guide, as well as the influential website Television Without Pity. In her free time, she watches far too many romantic comedies, bakes bread, watches her nephews get taller, and recently knitted her first hat. Evvie Drake Starts Over is her debut novel. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Chatting with Linda tonight, we are so lucky to also welcome Nora Flaherty. Nora is the host and producer of All Things Considered on Maine Public Radio. She's been working in public radio since 2002 and has covered news and culture in Michigan, the Bronx, the northmost tip of New York State, and since 2014, Maine, where life is indeed the way it should be. Nora has degrees in Latin American Studies and Anthropology. She's received awards from the Associated Press, Public Radio News Directors, Inc., Association of Women in Radio and Television, and the Edward R. Murrow Award for her work. Nora lives in Portland with her husband, their daughter, and their 2 dogs. So this may be the first and only time I admit in public, in front of the author, that I have not yet finished her book. I am a bookseller who loves books, and I try to read as many as I can, especially for events, but I am also a person who loves to watch my beloved Boston Red Sox, even though our bullpen has really been on the struggle bus lately, and take long naps in the summer sunshine. And the reason I'm telling you all that I have not finished Evvie Drake is because all I have wanted to do today, yesterday, and all I want to do tomorrow is finish this lovely, wonderful, sassy, cozy book. The Washington Post praises this novel is escapism at its finest, focused on 2 people who have had an abrupt change in plans and must forge a path forward. And inevitably, it's a love story, the kind you can slip in and out of reading as you would a pool and still find yourself totally immersed. So thank you to Linda for writing a book that I fall asleep with on my face as I try to reach for one more chapter past my 10 p.m. bedtime. This book is a delight, and I hope you can all clear some room this weekend to gobble it up. Please join me in welcoming Linda Holmes and Nora Flaherty.
That events lineup is wonderful. I would go to all those events. That's amazing. I apologize for getting off on the wrong foot with my vulgar language, but I was so excited.
Okay. It's good.
Very
It's enthusiasm.
excited. It's
Yeah.
so good. Oh.
Can you guys hear us? Yes. Cool. Okay, some of this is going to be a little retread. I have a little introduction for Linda as well. For pop culture nerds, though, she needs no introduction. She's been recapping, commenting, critiquing, generally chewing the scenery of pop culture and the internet, or on the internet even, full-time since 2007, which is a pretty early days. You've been one of the big sort of influential early people doing the pop culture, thinking about it seriously stuff. That, for me, is a big deal. Okay, she is now NPR's pop culture correspondent, and with Glenn Weldon, the host of the Pop Culture Happy Hour. And although I could happily talk all night about your take on Toy Story 4, the ending of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which I really need to talk to someone about a lot.
Yes, we did too.
And, definitely. And we do it, what we do in the shadows. It's going to go the wrong way there. You can all, by the way, find all of that at npr.org. That is not, as you've heard, why we're here. We are here because you are a debut novelist, Evvie Drake Starts Over, the story of a youngish Maine woman who is suddenly widowed and has to deal with not only her husband's death, but the fact that she wasn't really happy with him. We won't go too much into the plot detail. You guys, I hope, are all buying the book. No spoilers, but we are honored to have Linda Holmes here with us this evening to talk about the book and about your life as a pop culture critic. I was going to say diva, maven, I don't know. So, Linda, let me ask you, though, first off, none of that, how does it feel to be a novelist?
Really strange, but great. I've done a lot of people's book events, but I'm always in that chair. It's really fun. I have to say, it's something that I've wanted to do for a really, really, really long time, decades and decades, honestly. So it's special and wonderful, and I think that there is still something. There's something about a physical book, holding a book in your hand that is your book, that is a pretty special experience. It has been for me.
So you have been writing nonfiction for a very long time.
Yes.
Why did you make this leap, and why did you do it now?
As I said, I always wanted, oh my God, I just realized this is the same rug I have in my bedroom.
Why did you buy this rug, and why did you buy this rug now?
Tell me what you like about this rug. That's such a funny feeling. I'm like, I wanted to write a novel for ages and ages. It wasn't until this book tour that I really learned that everyone didn't want to write a novel when they were a young reader, because I just assumed everyone did. I think that I didn't have the confidence to do it. I didn't know if I knew what I was doing. And then I got away from thinking about that by the time I was in high school and college, because I started to sort of think more practically about what should I be doing and what am I going to do with my life. And I didn't really know what being a novelist would look like at that stage. So like everyone who doesn't know what the next thing will look like, I went to law school. And I was an attorney for, I practiced for probably about 10 years. And gradually, would pick up little pieces of fiction writing, put them back down again, pick them up. And then in 2012, if you're familiar with National Novel Writing Month, which is the thing that happens every November, where they encourage you to write 50,000 words, which 50,000 words is not really novel length necessarily, it's more novella length, but they encourage you to just try to sit down and get some fiction writing done. And it's a very public, you can post on different, public computer bulletin boards where people talk about their progress. And I intended to do that, and I actually started this book. So this was November of 2012. And then on the fourth day of the month, and you're trying to do this real massive push, you're trying to write as much as you can. It's taking up all your free time in order to get to your 50,000 words for the month. And I think on the fourth or fifth day of the month, there was a flood in my apartment. So it was too bad, not going to do that. But by then I had written just enough that I had a little piece. And over the next couple of years, it just kind of would come back into my life, and I would pick it up now and then. And then sometime in 2016, I don't know if you remember this, but it was kind of like a tense fall in some ways. It was just a really heavy It was like a really heavy, stressful election cycle. I think especially if you worked in news, it was a very intense day to day.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I figured you wouldn't. Just very intense day to day, and I needed something else to think about, and so I picked it up again, and it was done by the end of March of 2017. So.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned right there at the beginning of that answer that when you were a young reader, you thought everyone wanted to write a novel. Mm-hmm. Okay, some readers in the room, I'm thinking, what were the books that you were reading when you were a young reader that sort of made you feel that way?
Yeah. When I was young, I think I read a lot of the same books that a lot of young readers who were kind of similar age and location to me. I read, I read the Little House books. I think I read some Nancy Drew, and oh gosh, of course I read a lot of Sweet Valley High because that was of that time. But then sometime when I was in middle school, our middle school librarian gave me Rebecca and said, I think I was only in yeah. And I think I love it so much when I think about it now because I think I was only in maybe 6th grade or so. And she knew that I obviously wouldn't understand everything about Rebecca in the 6th grade, but she wanted to get me started on kind of a book that would feel like a big, interesting book. Because I also read so much stuff aimed at the age that I was. Some Judy Blume, which I loved her stuff so much. But when I was given Rebecca, it was like, see what it's like to read a big, chewy, grown-up novel. And then I read, not long after that, I read Gone with the Wind, and it was sort of, I was getting into that kind of stuff. And then I read, when I was a teenager, I read a ton of commercial fiction. I read a ton of, I read all the Stephen King, I think, almost, and a ton of Jackie Collins, to be honest, when I was a teenager. So, lots of interesting stuff.
We don't think of Stephen King as commercial fiction here.
Yeah, no, I know. But he's a really, I'm happy to, I will kind of go to the mat for the fact that I think that's a person who writes horror because he decided that that's what he's interested in. He's also written some really wonderful things that aren't horror and are really, I think, sensitive and interesting and intelligent. And I actually think he's a really terrific writer and somebody who was very influential on me.
Certainly is, yeah. So I wanted to ask you also, so I'm not sure, I didn't notice in any of your bio stuff a connection with Maine, although I could be wrong. So why did you set it in Maine? Many novels about Maine have sort of the landscape as a character, or they sort of use like Maine as like a shorthand for something. You're not really doing that here, so why Maine?
When I was between about 8 and 12, probably, my family would come in the summer to Sprucehead Island, which is right off of Rockland. And there were these 2 vacation houses that were owned by a man that my parents were friends with. And so we would rent one of these 2 vacation places for a couple weeks in the summer. So I spent several summer vacations in that area, which is very much where the book takes place. And then when I was older, after I was an adult, when my sister's kids were little, we all came back and we stayed in those same places for a couple years in a row. And honestly, it's just, I have to say, it's just fondness. And I think that at some point one of the things that the book is about, Evvie is a young widow. She's struggling with a lot of complicated feelings. And I wanted her to live in a place that would be both loving and special, and also potentially a place that she would have to resist the urge to just kind of settle in and never leave. And it's very much that kind of part of the country for me. So I did the best I could to kind of be there when I could. I wrote a lot of the second draft in the Camden Public Library, which is a really beautiful, the public library in Camden, I have to say, boy, is it pretty. They've got a reading room upstairs that looks out at the water, and it's really something. And I wrote a lot of the second draft up there.
So how did you get to know Maine then for this book as you were writing it?
How did I get to know it?
Yeah, I guess I heard you saying Linda was in our office earlier today talking
Yeah.
to Jennifer Rooks for Maine Calling, and you were mentioning that you had subscribed to the Maine Calling podcast.
Yes,
What else did
that
you do?
is true. I did try to I did a fair amount of reading. I did some reading about Evvie's father is a lobster fisherman, so I did some of it was just reading. But I also subscribed to a couple of different podcasts that are based out of Maine to try to have, I knew that I would have a visitor's eye always because that's just unavoidable, and I'm not, that was always going to be the case. But I wanted the best opportunity to have a little bit more of a day-to-day sense of what people might be talking about and what the tone might be like. And so I subscribed to Maine Calling and a couple of other podcasts that are based out of here. I guess podcasts are my answer to everything. So yeah, just to try to get something that felt a little more not tourist aimed, but regular life aimed.
Yeah, no, and I have to say, one of the things that I appreciate about this book is I love Maine. I do think it is actually the way that life should be, and I do think, yes, life's good in Portland. But sometimes when I read things that are set in Maine, it's kind of like, oh, are we talking about this again? Really? Because people who live here, we don't constantly talk about the landscape, right? Or maybe we do, I don't know. So I appreciated that. I did want to ask you, and this is sort of another Maine thing, but
Sure.
It's really common, as I'm sure you are aware, to set sort of a light romance, kind of chick lit novel in Maine or in a similarly craggy and wild and beautiful area.
Sure.
With sort of the handsome fisherman gruffly sweeping someone off their feet, and that's not really quite what this is. Given that you are dealing with some fairly heavy stuff, why did you choose, and this is my left turn away from Maine into genre, why did you choose the romance genre? Or do you feel like that's not really a good characterization?
It is perfectly fine with me if people consider it to be a romance, because I think the definition of a romance, if you talk to the trade group, the Romance Writers of America, they say it has to have a central love story and a, not necessarily entirely happy ending, but a kind of an optimistic ending. And I think those things are both true of this book, even though for me, it is almost equally weighted for me between the story that is about her kind of potential romantic relationship and her closest friendship. So it's a friendship story and a love story, but there's not really any such genre as half romance and half friendship. So, and honestly, I love romance readers and I love romance writers, and I've been a romance reader for a long time, so I have no hesitation about that at all. If people say romance or beach read or chick lit or women's fiction, although women buy most fiction, so most fiction is women's fiction. Whatever people want to call it is fine. I just hope that it resonates.
Never heard women's fiction before. That's
Oh yeah, women's fiction is what they call it when they're afraid that if you call it romance, people will think it's unserious. It's also a little bit what they call it if it's similar in tone and focus to a romance, except it's about a woman and maybe her family or her, just a friendship. Women's fiction is a very general and interesting name for anything, I think.
So it's like a novel that passes the Bechdel test.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, but like I said, a woman that I know who works in publishing was telling me, look, the percentage of women's fiction that's bought by women is not that different from the percentage of any other kind of fiction, just because women do a lot of the fiction buying. But those things, I think everybody, if you're going to publish a book, it's like, well, I don't know if I want people to think of it this way or this way. I want you to think of it as, I want you to think of it as serious. And what if people don't think it's literary enough? And it's, to me, the point of those descriptors is not to say what the book is, it's to help people find the kind of book they want to read. And it's not necessarily a comment on the quality of the book, because there's good romance and bad romance, and good women's fiction and bad women's fiction, and frankly, good literary fiction and terrible, agonizing literary fiction. So it's about helping people to find the read that they're looking for more than, commenting on whether it's a good book or not. But, those are things I've obviously, as you can tell, been through in my own mind in terms of I want respect. It worked so hard.
I just don't want to be writing some girl book. Ew.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you about your process. So you've written nonfiction for a very long time, as I said. Writing fiction is, I think, very, very different. How was that different? And also, how was the whole revision process? Because that's very intense with fiction.
Yeah. I think for me, I was somebody who, I tried to outline the book at some point, and I just am not an outliner. Because I would start to outline, and then when I started to actually write, I would feel like I was ignoring where the book was trying to go to get back to where the outline was, and that was not fitting right for me. So I really became somebody who just wrote the book and tried to kind of, I knew roughly where I wanted to end up. I knew kind of what the opening was and tried to kind of follow it through to the end. But part of what that means, especially since I wasn't somebody who had studied fiction writing, I wasn't somebody who had an MFA, and as I said, a lot of my reading life had been commercial fiction and had not been, I wasn't somebody who could rattle off kind of a lot of literary kind of, strategies or something like that. And I tried to be very realistic about the fact that for that reason, because I'd written a lot of nonfiction and because of who I think I am, I know how to write a good sentence. I like on a sentence-to-sentence basis what my writing sounds like, and I know what my voice is. But there are a lot of structural things about what should the pacing be like, and what's too early to introduce something, and what's too late to introduce something, and structural things and pacing things that I really leaned heavily on the editing process, which was really, really actually very positive for me. It is difficult when you have, I think if the first draft was this long, then the second draft was this long, and then the third draft was this long. So what happens is they want you to expand on certain ideas, but then some of that comes out, and then also some of the stuff that was in there from the beginning comes out in that kind of big, massive cut. And so it was really good for me to learn, among other things, that the fact that you cut something doesn't mean that it's not worth writing, that it wasn't worth your having written it, or that you wasted your time. And an example would be the guy that she meets in this book, who comes to live with her as a baseball player, who is suffering from the yips, the sort of all of a sudden I can't pitch, in his case, all of a sudden I can't pitch. And I had written at one point far more of a history of the yips in baseball than probably anybody needed to read. And it was all in the book. And my editor and I kind of eventually had a conversation that was like, no, it's very important for you to know all of this and for you to have written all of this. But then the good thing is you get to the end and you can pick out just the things that are the most helpful, and you can kind of push it, you kind of push it together, and almost like a compressed watermelon situation. You come up with a very concentrated, intense version of what the thing is when you just push it down to kind of a smaller volume.
Aren't watermelons already kind of dense?
Well, no, they're mostly water. I think compressed watermelon is a thing. I feel like it is from Top Chef, maybe. I might be making that up, in which case I think we should invent compressed watermelon.
Absolutely. It'd be like this big.
Yeah, a whole watermelon.
Be really intense and delicious.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds like a super, a loving editorial process. Is that?
It was. I have to say, my experience in publishing, I've been really super lucky. I have a wonderful agent who I worked with, and it has made me so sympathetic to people who get up on the Academy Awards and thank their agent, their manager, and all that stuff, because it always, if you're watching it, it's like, this is the most boring thing in the entire world. Get back to thanking either members of your family or people that I've heard of. But I had such a really helpful and wonderful collaborative process with my agent to get the book sold, and then the editor. and also, quite frankly, the people in publicity and marketing. And that was really valuable to me. You know, if you're a cultural critic, you don't always really know what publicity and marketing looks like, because it's kind of not your problem to know about that. But I think it is valuable to understand how things get into the world and how they rise or fall on somewhat random happenstance things. So the whole thing has been really, really lovely. I have very few complaints about the whole process, which makes me very fortunate.
Yeah, definitely. So, speaking of, your previous career, not knowing about marketing and publicity, the characters in this book, which, again, really, really lovely book, they're kind of steeped in NPR and podcasts and that sort of thing.
True.
But they're not really pop culture junkies. Did you catch yourself? Like, did you pull yourself back loads of times?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very easy for me to write a book that was just like people going back and forth about, and there's a little bit of this in the book, but the people going back about like their favorite Law and Order episodes for, because it's the kind of stuff that I do, and I could write 50 pages of that. But I wanted to make sure that the amount of that kind of stuff that was in the book, the amount of kind of back and forth, was the right amount, and not just the most satisfying to me to write, but the most satisfying to the reader. So yeah, this book could be twice as long as it is, just from me having everybody yap for twice as long in all the scenes, because it's a thing I love to write, because I am a fan of romantic comedy and great dialogue writers, Aaron Sorkin and people like that, who write really musical, beautiful dialogue. So yeah, I had to pull back from it somewhat. And plus, it's a little home cooking. You throw a little love to the things that you love.
The podcasts.
Yeah.
They rarely refer to them either. They're just kind of alluded to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get too specific, because I didn't want to sound like I was calling out anybody's specific actual podcast, because that would sound bad.
So one other thing I think is interesting in this book is that the main character, Evvie, she's a transcriptionist. And that's kind of a big part of her character. Why did you choose that?
One of the things about Evvie, and this is one of the challenges for her in kind of dealing with the death of her husband, is that she's somebody who has trouble being invested in her own story. She's sometimes more interested in other people's stories. She takes very good care of her friends. She takes very good care of her father. She was raised by a single dad. But it's hard for her to talk about her own story and to surface all the details of her own life, even with the people that she's really close to. So I wrote her always as somebody who was fascinated by reading other people's stories. And at one point, the way that manifested was she was a reader of kind of diaries. That was the genre of reading that she loved. But the way that it turned out, it's funny, it was really important for her to have a job, something that she was good at and that people valued in her, and that she was really kind of extremely competent at. And I think good transcribing from people who know what they're talking about, so that it's accurate, and also so that they're not writing gibberish every 5 words, because they know what they're getting into. I think it was interesting to me for that reason, and it fit well with her notion that she loves to listen to people's life stories.
And there's a lot of caretaking in this book, and there's also the thing about her husband, who is not abusive, but is just like a jerk.
I think he's not physically abusive. I think he's emotionally abusive, probably, and that's again, it's hard for her to talk about what's going on in her life, because it's hard for her to quantify in a way that if she went to somebody and said, well, it's really terrible and I really feel like I need to leave, she wouldn't know exactly what to say. Because sometimes when you're trying to just describe how insults make you feel, it's very easy to feel like, well, this is just being married, and this is just, sometimes people say things that hurt your feelings, and it's hard for her to wrap her brain around a little bit, which is why she hasn't told anybody. And that's one of the things that's so difficult, is that she's chosen to kind of keep all of this a secret, which is part of what makes it so painful.
I wanted to ask you about the sort of abandonment as well in this book, because there's a few instances in the book where these things are in these people's past. I guess it's funny to talk about these people as if they are real people, because they are characters. But
Sure.
why did you choose to create these people who have this particular kind of damage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that once I decided, I think Evvie's tendency to be drawn to someone who felt very secure for her. He was very well thought of by everyone, kind of besides her. And he was a doctor, and she had a lot of security with him. I think I felt like there was, for her to be that way, there was probably some insecurity in the way that she grew up. And so she was raised by a single parent, and so she's still kind of, her mom is in her life, but she was raised mostly by her father. And I think that she has a little bit of that. She wanted a place to wind up that would feel like it wasn't going to change, and I think that's how she wound up in an unhappy marriage. And then she's, her best friend is a single parent, and I think partly she's drawn to that because she has a lot of respect for it. She has a lot of respect for people who are great parents, and I happen to have a best friend who's a single parent, and so I think I also have great respect for that. It wasn't a particular, that part wasn't as calculated as I think it might seem in the final telling. It's just kind of how all these people got to be the way they are.
All right, well, I'll switch to something lighter. I don't feel like I can ask you anything more about the book without totally giving away the plot. So I'll ask you what you are watching right now and what we should be watching.
What I'm watching right now. So a lot of the stuff that's very interesting right now is on streaming services, and I'm far from the first person to say that. But we recently had a conversation on the show about Fleabag, which is really wonderful, which is on Amazon Prime, made by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who astonishingly is also the creator of Killing Eve, which is also wonderful and weird. And there are a bunch of pieces of television about women, and often created by women, that have emerged in the last couple of years that have really been it's such a pleasure to see more of that. Issa Rae doing Insecure on HBO, which is a show I think is so interesting. On another note entirely, there just was news today that they rescued the One Day at a Time revival, which has been running on Netflix, and Netflix decided to stop making it after 3 seasons, and it just today we found out that Pop TV, which is a cable channel, is going to make another season of it. And it's so wonderful, and the existing 3 seasons are still on Netflix. I definitely encourage you to seek that out if you haven't already. That's overseen by Norman Lear, who did the original One Day at a Time. And so those are wonderful too. There is so much stuff that is so much fun to watch. I loved Always Be My Maybe, which is a romantic comedy that Randall Park and Ali Wong were in, with a fantastic Keanu Reeves appearance playing himself. One of the funniest things I've seen on television this year. He is having such a great summer. He's also wonderful in Toy Story 4, and the John Wick movies are a very specific taste. But if you like that sort of thing, there is so much great stuff. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to be able to talk about so many great things. Russian Doll is on Netflix. That's another super interesting Netflix series that, created by women. Yeah, great, good stuff.
And this is just my personal thing. I apologize if no one else cares about this at all. But since I've got you here in front of an audience. No, I know we're between seasons, but could I get 2 sentences on Bojack Horseman?
Honestly, I have always been afraid of Bojack Horseman. I watched some of it. It's a
cartoon horse. It's okay.
It's a cartoon, Linda. It's okay. I watched some of it, and it is really it's very emotionally intense. And so I have kind of not kept up with it because I feel like I increasingly go to television for not necessarily devastation purposes. So when people say, you got to watch this, it's devastating, I'm always like, do I though? I work in a newsroom. I have enough devastating. Yeah, so I'm not an expert on that one. I do think it's a super interesting project, and there's wonderful talent associated with it.
Okay. I actually recently heard about someone who worked in The Hague, and he told some journalists that when he went home at night, all he could do was watch the British Bake Off.
Oh yeah, for
and he
sure.
would just watch it and cry.
Oh, British Bake Off, and I'll tell you something else about the British Bake Off. Let's talk about the British Bake Off.
Oh yeah, definitely got to talk about that.
British Bake Off is such an interesting example of something where when the hosts decided to leave, and they decided to one of the judges left and the hosts left, and they decided to really revamp the cast, I thought, well, I am not going to be into this anymore at all. And surprisingly enough, I still really, really enjoy it. I think they did a great job recasting it, and even though I feel somewhat disloyal to Mel and Sue and Mary Berry, I actually still really enjoy it, which is the same thing that happened to me with Project Runway when Tim Gunn and Heidi Klum left. They had a great season of Project Runway. It sounds weird, but the ability to recast a reality show that's where the source of continuity is the people, the ability to recast those is actually really interesting to me. I think that those producers who do stuff like that that's quite a feat.
No, it's true, and this is nerdy about the Bake Off, but it really, like, having Noel Fielding, who was sort of an important kind of niche comic in England, and then having him come back and be like this lovable goth teddy bear. It's been wonderful.
I think those seasons are so good. I think they did such a lovely job recasting it, and I think they didn't try too much to have exactly the same vibe. They got people who have a slightly different vibe, and I think that's always the way to go. So.
Well, I could do this all night. I have a lot of things to say about TV, but I'm sure that we're probably needing to move on to the next part of this event. Okay.
Sure. I'm reading.
Oh, okay.
Am I reading? I can. Can I borrow your copy of the book?
Of course you can.
I don't have a copy of the book.
It's okay. It's all in your head, right?
I'm actually going to read from the very, very beginning of the book because that's sort of the easiest thing to do because it's not spoiling. It's the least spoiling possible. Go now or you'll never go, Evvie warned herself. She didn't want to be there when he got home from work. It was cowardly, yes, but she didn't relish the whole thing it would turn into, the whole mess. He'd say, not unreasonably, that leaving with no warning at all was a little dramatic. After all this time, he would wonder, why now? He wouldn't know that today, exactly, Evvie had been with him for half her life. She'd figured it out on the back of a grocery receipt a few months earlier, and then she had circled this date on their wall calendar in red. He'd walked by it over and over and never once asked her about it. If she let the day pass, she thought she might start to disappear, cell by cell, bone by bone, replaced by someone who looked like her but wasn't. She popped the trunk of her Honda and stuffed a fat envelope of cash into the glove compartment. This part might be silly. She didn't think Tim would cancel the credit cards or close the accounts, but her life had a lot of just in case in it, and she needed money just in case she didn't know him as well as she thought. It wouldn't be the first time she'd stumbled while trying to predict him. She went into the house and opened the hall closet. She pulled down the worn, hard-sided blue suitcase with the stickers all over it, Paris, London. It was light, and it rattled from inside as she made her way down the porch steps and pushed it into the back seat of the car. The sounds of her feet on the driveway pavement tempted her to smile. There was more to retrieve from the house, but she slid into the front seat and closed the door, leaning back against the headrest with her eyes closed. I'm really going. In a few hours, she would be in some chain hotel with scratchy bedspreads and a ragtag cable lineup. She would buy a bottle of wine or a box of it, and she'd lie dead center in the king-size bed and drink and wiggle her toes and read for as long as she wanted. But then she began to wonder what she would do tomorrow, and there wasn't time for that, so she took a deep breath and got out of the car to get the rest of her things. She was walking up the driveway when her phone rang. The ringtone always startled her a little bit, a metallic arpeggio that sounded like an electric harp. The call was from the hospital in Camden where Tim sometimes saw patients. She didn't want to talk to him, but she needed to know if he would be home early. Hello? May I speak with Eveleth Drake? It was not Tim. This is Evvie. Mrs. Drake, my name is Colleen Marshall. I'm a nurse at Camden Hospital. I'm calling because Dr. Drake was brought into our ER about a half an hour ago. He's been in a car accident. A thump in Evvie's heart traveled out to her fingertips. For 1/10 of 1 second, she wanted to tell the nurse to call Tim's parents because she was just leaving him. Oh my God, she said instead, is he all right? The pause was so long she could hear a doctor being paged in the background. He's badly hurt. You should come in just as soon as you can. Do you know where we're located? Yes, she choked out. I'll be there in probably 20 minutes. Evvie's hands shook as she tapped out a text to Andy. Tim was in a car accident. Bad. Camden Hospital. Can you tell my dad? She turned her key in the ignition and pulled out of her driveway, heading toward Camden. She later figured from her phone and all the paperwork that he probably died while she was waiting at the stoplight at Chisholm Street, a block from the church where they got married. And that's the prologue.